Hey everyone, my name is Rooster, and no, this is not a clickbait title. I am taking a step back from Mechabellum. For those of you that watch my stream, you might have seen me touch upon the topic a couple days ago, but I still wanted to make a more condensed version of what I had to say and the reasons behind my decision on YouTube. And I know that some of you only watch me on this platform, so that also is a reason why I'm making this video. This decision has not been made lightheartedly. It is something that I've thought about for a while. There are multiple reasons that kind of together form the decision, and that's what I want to, briefly touch upon in this video. You will find all of the different reasons and, when I explain them, timestamped down below. And yeah, I mean, without further ado, let's get into it. So the topics I want to touch upon is, first of all, player numbers, followed by the esports scene, and then at the end, I want to touch upon, my own feelings about the game and the topic, I guess, of fun when it comes to gaming. And then at the very, very end, I will perhaps briefly mention what the plan is moving forward. So let's start with player numbers. I think that a lot of you may know that the game has been in a bit of a rocky state for a little while. Now, for those of you that don't perhaps know my entire journey in Mechabellum, I started playing relatively early on in August of 2023, not too long after the game was first put on early access on Steam. And I've been through all of the lows and the highs since then. At the very start, of course, we see a decline. There's been a free weekend, a bit of a bump. And then here, January, February of 2024 is when a big, slightly controversial patch was released with the introduction of unit reinforcements, the unit drops. And whilst that did take a bit of a hit, or at least the player base did at first, it very quickly recovered. And I do think that, generally speaking, it was a very good addition to the game. It kept things fresh, and it has brought in a lot of new people. Then after that, I mean, we could see player numbers rise relatively rapidly, and we basically worked towards the release of the game in end of September, beginning of October 2024, with, of course, a massive spike. This was really kind of the heyday, I guess, of Mechabellum, with a lot of events happening as well. Creators, variety streamers from, other titles were, sponsored to play the game, and a lot of stuff was happening, kind of content was booming, and so, yeah, player numbers were relatively high throughout this entire period. We can see numbers, kind of varying between 3,000 to 5,000 or 6,000 even at times. That kind of ended in March of 2025, and after, there weren't as many events anymore at that point, and so we see a decline here from the really big event kind of days, and then just a stable period with a little bit less happening, but still player numbers were quite high during all of it. And we were just having around 3,000 people online for a good period of time, which is a very respectable, I think, average number of players to have online for a game like this. And then up and around the end of the summer of 2025, September 2025, we see a pretty rapid decline of player base. Numbers drop from 3K in a couple of months down to below 2K, even nearing 1,500 at once. Goes up ever since, but it has been pretty stable up and around the 1,700-1,800 mark, with recent numbers kind of dropping again, and no real signs of a massive revitalization of the game. Now, there are a bunch of different reasons, or a bunch of different arguments people want to make as to why this has happened. It is end of the summer. However, we have seen big player numbers at other times of the year, especially the big boom kind of happened at end of the year up until, spring. And I think one of the main things that happens here is this was when the building patch was introduced. It was not well received. I think it really hurt overall kind of sentiment within the community. It wasn't properly handled either, if you ask me. And yeah, that has never really recovered like it did with unit reinforcements. And so this is a slight problem, because what this has meant in practice for a content creator like me is that interest in Mechabellum has wavered. It has dropped rather significantly. There is still a core community that is very interested in the game and that is loyal, and that's amazing. But, you know, I have barely gained followers whenever I stream the game on Twitch. Subscribers on YouTube also have, you know, been going up a lot slower than they did in the past, and numbers are essentially stagnating. And this is a bad sign, because, you know, the step after stagnation is that it will slowly start declining as the core group of loyal viewers, you know, also starts to move away. And whilst this decision is being made, I guess, a little bit in advance of what I'm expecting, I think that if I were to continue doing this, I would likely have to make the same decision as I'm making now within a year's time. And it's not just about, you know, the general player numbers and my perspective as a creator. It also ties into the next topic, which is the competitive scene. So as some of you may know, a couple days ago, Mag1 made an announcement that they sadly had to cancel Season 7 of, their tournaments. And that is, aside from being, you know, a very sad news, also a bad sign for, you know, the competitive scene of Mechabellum. Mag1 has pretty much been driving that for the past 1.5 years. And what it does is it incentivizes the top end of the player base to put in the effort to be able to compete in those tournaments. And that tournament creates a lot of, well, good content, first of all, but it also just makes sure that there's the people with the knowledge, you know, that stay in the game to be able to then kind of pass it on to whoever might be joining and has no idea where to start. With Mag1 falling off, suddenly there is less of a reason for the top end to stay, and I expect and have already witnessed a good portion of the very strong players kind of leave because, you know, they might not enjoy the game anymore. And on top of that, there is no reason for them to grind. There is nothing to really gain anymore from playing this game at the highest level and putting in the hours required to stay at the highest level. So, you know, we have the decline of the player base that's been happening already. And then on top of that, recent news, I think, will also mean that, you know, that will not improve. And yeah, those two things together don't really paint the best picture for what the future of Mechabellum looks like. Aside from that, I think the final topic that is very important is the fun aspect. I think gaming is supposed to be fun. The reason that I created this channel and started doing content is because I really love gaming and I fell in love with Mechabellum. I think that it had a ton of potential, unrealized potential. And I think for a little while now, I no longer see how that will be realized. In the past, I did, but I think now we're starting to slowly get to the point where it becomes very, very difficult to turn everything around, right? Revitalizing the competitive scene is going to be very difficult. And on top of that, right, we have those controversial patches and the overall player base that kind of needs to pick up as well. So it's a lot of things that have to happen in order for the game to, yeah, kind of become fun again. I know, at least from my own perspective, I haven't been enjoying the game as much for a little while. If you watch my streams, you know, in my live content, you will have noticed that for certain. On YouTube, I always try to curate interesting games, you know, things that I can teach something or show something a little bit unique. But, you know, finding that has gotten more and more tiresome, bothersome, difficult to do, as there's a lot of games to sift through, and, you know, most of them aren't that interesting to me anymore. What I really loved about Mechabellum is kind of the puzzle solving of it, right? Like, your opponent builds a strategy and you kind of have to solve how you have to deal with that. But, you know, as the game has progressed and the patches have slowed down somewhat, or at least the bigger changes. A lot of boards, look the same. A lot of strategies are just coming back from old metas, and there's just not really that fun kind of learning aspect to the game for me anymore. And I think that, doing something that you don't enjoy or enjoy less and less, when on top of that, right, the returns for doing so aren't the best, makes little sense. I wanted to do this because I enjoy it, and I think that is perhaps one of the more important things, aside from, numbers and, revenue streams, all of that. So yeah, that kind of brings me to the conclusion of this entire video, and the reason why I'm taking a step back from Mechabellum. It's just not worth it anymore for me at the moment, from a long-term financial perspective and from a fun perspective. I don't think that I can create good content, anymore on this game, at least at the time of speaking. This doesn't mean I'm completely abandoning it. I will probably come back every now and then, especially when, bigger changes, new seasons arrive. But the main content will definitely become different. And that brings me to the very final thing I wanted to talk about, which is, what does the future hold? What will the channel content look like? And I haven't fully answered that question yet. There are basically two things that I consider doing right now. One of them being I just try to find another main game and make content about that, very much like I did with Mechabellum. Haven't quite, made a choice yet, but to give you an idea, I've been really enjoying Trackmania. I think that game is a ton of fun, and there is fun content to make on that title. So that is an option. The alternative would be going more in the variety direction, where I spend 7 days playing a certain game, and then make a video about, what I learned, the highlights of playing that game for a week, and just kind of seeing, the learning process and how good I can get within a shorter period of time, and also to keep things fresh for myself. That is where things are at the moment. I don't know much more myself. I'm kind of trying to figure it out, but I do know that things have to change. It can't go on longer, sadly. And yeah, that is everything I wanted to talk about. If you like this video, please leave a thumbs up and let me know down in the comments below what you think about all of this. Feel free to share your thoughts. With that being said, take care, guys, and see you in the next video. Bye-bye.